Hi everyone, I'm Linda Loveland. I'm here with Jake Parker. He's the general counsel for the North Carolina Farm Bureau, and the big talk this week has been about Prop 12 because there were oral arguments this week before the Supreme Court. We were watching those or listening to those earlier this week and wanted to just kind of get the lowdown really on what you thought about how they went, first of all.
Yeah, interesting day in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. It's not every day that an agriculture case makes it to the nation's high court, and it was an interesting argument. I think generally a positive one for our side of the case, which is, of course, opposing Prop 12. But how the case comes out is going to be a real interesting thing, I guess you would say.
Yeah, it was really interesting to listen to the justices go back and forth and how they sort of cross in their questions, and some of them were combative, some weren't. But overall, I mean, how does this look going forward to you? Well, I mean,
It's hard to say. The justices
Get your crystal ball.
Yeah, I wish I had one. There are a lot of different things they were thinking about, and they really, when they're up on the bench and you have an advocate arguing a case, they're having a conversation with each other through the attorney who's before the court. And so you'll hear one question that seems kind of odd, but it's really talking to, let's say, Justice Thomas is trying to talk to Justice Kagan, and they're having the conversation through the judge. So there's stuff all over the place and different interests. What was interesting to me was several of the arguments that we raised in a brief that North Carolina Farm Bureau, North Carolina Pork Council, and the North Carolina Chamber filed with the court, along with other state farm bureaus and pork councils. Some of the issues we raised in that brief were brought up in the questioning, and that was really cool to see that, because I guess it means they read our brief, and some of them found it interesting enough to test some of the arguments we put out there.
And tell us about some of those arguments, because those were interesting when those came up.
Yeah, American Farm Bureau and National Pork Producers Council brought this case originally back in 2019, and the main argument is that what Prop 12 does, which is regulate hog production standards across the country, in our view, that violates what we call the Dormant Commerce Clause. We don't have time to get into what all that is, but the idea is that when the framers of the Constitution created our government, it did so because there was this Articles of Confederation, if you remember that from your history class, and there are all these different states were all fighting with each other over what products can go in and out of states. And so the idea is that the Constitutional Convention tried to solve that problem. So our argument is that what California's done is essentially gone back to what happened before the Constitution. And so we raised some of those questions, telling the judges, you could go back to first principles, and this would violate what the framers had in mind when they created the Constitution. And so some of the judges raised those questions. It was really interesting. They talked about North Carolina pork production in a little bit of ways, in the sense of that the way we produce pork here creates a low price protein that is healthy for people to eat. And so why would North Carolina not have the ability to do that the way they want to versus trying to follow what California has set for everybody? So it was really interesting to see that part of our argument come up.
Well, interesting that you're a historian, turns out, as well as an attorney, right? So
I guess,
a little history there.
A nerd for sure.
No. So moving forward then, what comes next?
So what comes next is the justices will meet later this week to decide what they're going to do with the case, how they're going to rule. They, of course, don't release that until much later in the year in a written opinion. So we won't know what the result is. It's not like a legislative vote where they all punch the button and you see the vote results come up. So they'll do that, and then they'll go through the process of writing the opinion. We can expect most likely the opinion not to come until 2023. Maybe early as March, but more likely probably in the June timeframe. This case seems like it's going to have a lot of moving parts, and a lot of different judges were in different places and how they were reviewing the case. So those type of opinions take a lot longer to work out than a very straightforward case. So I think it'll be a while before we hear from the court. I think, this is my opinion, I think they will send the case back. Where we are procedurally in the case is American Farm Bureau National Pork Producers Council filed their complaint, and the state of California moved to dismiss. The state won, so the case is essentially over unless the Supreme Court sends it back down. So we think that will happen just based on the way the questions went.
So we'll win our case in the Supreme Court,
at least in terms of the case going back. But what standard the lower court will have to apply, that'll be one of the things the court will talk about it's not really clear what that'll look like. So we could still be in for a round of litigation after this round of litigation, which is always interesting. Of course, Congress could step in and solve that problem as well. I don't know that that's likely, but that's something for our voting delegates and other folks to talk about over the next several months as we think about where we're going with this issue nationally.
So this isn't a quick fix. I mean, this isn't something that's going to end. It's going to be probably more litigation, but at least until that happens, everything stays as it is, though.
Yes,
So it's
that's
a good
right.
thing.
And for right now, California courts have put Prop 12 on hold. So it hasn't taken effect yet in reality, but the specter of it is still out there. So it's a really important issue that will be with us for a little while.
For sure. All right, Jakes, thank you.
Thank you.